Hello, my friends. It's Indiana Holmes here for story time, and we continue with Jules Verne's novel, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. We begin with Chapter 18, The Polyps. For several days, the Nautilus kept off the American coast. Evidently, it did not wish to risk the tides of the Gulf of Mexico or the Sea of the Antilles. April 16th, we sighted Martinique and Guadeloupe from a distance of about 30 miles. I saw their tall peaks for an instant. The Canadian, who counted on carrying out his projects in the Gulf by either landing or hailing one of the numerous boats that coasted from one island to another, was quite disheartened. Flight would have been quite practicable if Ned Land had been able to take possession of the boat without the captain's knowledge. But in the open sea it could not be thought of. The Canadian, Conseil, and I had a long conversation on the subject. For 6 months we had been prisoners on board the Nautilus. We had traveled 17,000 leagues, and as Ned Land said, there was no reason why it should come to an end. We could hope nothing from the captain of the Nautilus, but only from ourselves. Besides, for some time past he had become graver, more retired, less sociable. He seemed to shun me. I met him rarely. Formerly, he was pleased to explain the submarine marvels to me. Now he left me to my studies, and came no more to the saloon. What change had come over him? For what cause? For my part, I did not wish to bury with me my curious and novel studies. I had now the power to write the true book of the sea, and this book, sooner or later, I wished to see daylight. The land nearest us was in the archipelago of the Bahamas. There rose high submarine cliffs, covered with large weeds. It was about 11 o'clock when Ned Land drew my attention to the formidable prickling, like the sting of an ant, which was produced by the means of large seaweeds. Well, I said, these are proper caverns for polyps, and I should not be astonished to see some of these monsters. What? Said Conseil. Cuttlefish, real cuttlefish, of the Cephalopod class. Cephalopod class? No, I said, polyps of huge dimensions. I will never believe that such animals exist, said Ned. Well, said Conseil, with the most serious air in the world, I remember perfectly to have seen a large vessel drawn under the waves by an octopus arm. You saw that? Said the Canadian. Yes, Ned. With your own eyes. With my own eyes. Where, pray, might that be? At St. Malo, answered Conseil. In the port? Said Ned ironically. No, in a church, replied Conseil. In a church? Cried the Canadian. Yes, friend Ned, in a picture representing the polyp in question. Good, said Ned Land, bursting out laughing. He is quite right, I said. I have heard of this picture, but the subject represented is taken from a legend, and you know what to think of legends in the matter of natural history. Besides, when it is a question of monsters, imagination is apt to run wild. Not only is it supposed that these polyps can draw down vessels, but a certain Olaus Magnus speaks of an octopus a mile long that is more like an island than an animal. It is also said that the bishop of Nidros was building an altar on an immense rock. Mass finished, the rock began to walk and returned to the sea. The rock was a polyp. Another bishop, Pontoppidan, speaks of a polyp on which a regiment of cavalry could maneuver. Lastly, the ancient naturalists speak of monsters whose mouths were like gulfs, and which were too large to pass through the Straits of Gibraltar. But how much is true of these stories? Asked Conseil. Nothing, my friends, at least of that which passes the limit of truth, to get to a fable or legend. Nevertheless, there must be some ground for the imagination of the storytellers. One cannot deny that the polyps and the cuttlefish exist of a large species, inferior, however, to the cetaceans. Aristotle has stated the dimensions of a cuttlefish as 5 cubits, or 9 feet 2 inches. Our fishermen frequently see some that are more than 4 feet long. Some skeletons of polyps are preserved in the museums of Triste and Montpellier. The measure 2 yards in length. Besides, according to the calculations of some naturalists, one of these animals only 6 feet long would have tentacles 27 feet long. That would suffice to make a formidable monster. Do they fish for them in these days? Asked Ned. If they do not fish for them, sailors see them at least. One of my friends, Captain Paul de Boss of Havre, has often affirmed that he met one of these monsters of colossal dimensions in the Indian Ocean. But the most astonishing fact, and which does not permit of denial of its existence, of these gigantic animals, happened some years ago in 1861. What is the fact? Asked Ned Land. What is the fact? Asked Ned Land. This is it. In 1861, to the northeast of Tenerife, very nearly in the same latitude we are in now, the crew of a dispatch boat, the Alcator, perceived a monstrous cuttlefish swimming in the waters. Captain Borger went near to the animal and attacked it with a harpoon and guns, without much success, for balls and harpoons glided over the soft flesh. After several fruitless attempts, the crew tried to pass a slip knot round the body of the mollusk. The noose slipped as far as the tail fins, and there stopped. They tried then to haul it on board, but its weight was so considerable that the tightness of the cord separated the tail from the body and deprived us of this ornament. He disappeared under the water. Indeed, that a fact? An indisputable fact, my good friend Ned. They propose to name this polyp Borger's cuttlefish. What length was it? Asked the Canadian. Did it not measure about 6 yards? Said Conseil, who, posted at the window, was examining again the irregular windings of the cliff. Precisely, I replied. Its head, rejoined Conseil. Was it not crowned with 8 tentacles that beat the water like a nest of serpents? Precisely. Had not its eyes, placed at the back of its head, considerable development? Yes, Conseil. And was its mouth like a parrot's beak? Exactly, Conseil. Very well, no offense to master, he replied quietly. If this is not Bouguer's cuttlefish, it is, at least, one of its brothers. I looked at Conseil. Ned Land hurried to the window. What a horrible beast! He cried. I looked in my turn and could not repress a gesture of disgust. Before my eyes was a horrible monster worthy to figure in the legends of the marvelous. It was an immense cuttlefish, being 8 yards long. It swam crossways in the direction of the Nautilus with great speed, watching us with its enormous staring green eyes. Its 8 arms, or rather feet, fixed to its head, that have given the name of cephalopod to these animals, were twice as long as its body, and were twisted like the furry's hair. One could see the 250 air holes on the inner side of the tentacles. The monster's mouth, a horned beak like a parrot, opened and shut vertically. Its tongue, a horned substance, furnished with several rows of pointed teeth, came out quivering from its veritable pair of shears. What a freak nature! It is indeed a freak of nature. A bird's beak on a mollusk. Its spindle-like body formed a fleshy mass that might weigh 4,000 to 5,000 pounds, the varying color changing with great rapidity, according to the irritation of the animal, passed successively from livid gray to reddish brown. What irritated this mollusk? No doubt the presence of the Nautilus, more formidable than itself, and on which its suckers or its jaws had no hold. Yet what monsters these polyps are! What vitality the Creator has given them! What vigor in their movements! And they possess 3 hearts! Chance had brought us in the presence of this cuttlefish, and I did not wish to lose the opportunity to carefully study this specimen of cephalopods. I overcame the horror that inspired me, and taking a pencil began to draw it. Perhaps this is the same which the Alcator saw, said Conseil. No, replied the Canadian, for this is whole, and the other had lost its tail. That is no reason, I replied. The arms and the tails of these animals are reformed by renewal, and in 7 years the tail of the Borger's cuttlefish has no doubt had time to grow. By this time, other polyps appeared at the port light. I counted 7. They formed a procession after the Nautilus, and I heard their beaks gnashing against the iron hull. I continued my work. These monsters kept the water with such precision that they seemed immovable. Suddenly, the Nautilus stopped. A shock made it tremble in every plate. Have we struck anything? I asked. In any case, replied the Canadian, we shall be free, for we are floating. The Nautilus was floating, no doubt, but it did not move. A minute passed. Captain Nemo, followed by his lieutenant, entered the drawing room. I had not seen him for some time. He seemed dull, without noticing or speaking to us. He went to the panel, looked at the polyps, and said something to his lieutenant. The latter went out. Soon the panels were shut. The ceiling was lighted. I went towards the captain. A curious collection of polyps, I said. Yes, indeed, Mr. Naturalist, he replied, and we are going to fight them, man to beasts. I looked at him. I thought I had not heard right. Man to beast, I repeated. Yes, sir. The screw is stopped. I think that the horny jaws of one of the cuttlefish is entangled in the blades. That is preventing us our moving. What are you going to do? Rise to the surface and slaughter this vermin. A difficult enterprise. Yes, indeed, the electric bullets are powerless against the soft flesh, where they do find resistance enough to go off. But we shall attack with a hatchet. And a harpoon, sir, said the Canadian, if you do not refuse my help. I will accept it, Master Land. We will follow you, I said, and following Captain Nemo, we went towards the central staircase. There, about 10 men with boarding hatchets, were ready for the attack. Conseil and I took 2 hatchets. Ned Land seized a harpoon. The Nautilus had then risen to the surface. One of the sailors, posted on top of the ladder step, unscrewed the bolts of the panels. But hardly were the screws loosened when the panel rose with great violence, evidently drawn by the suckers of the polyp's arms. Immediately, one of the arms slid like a serpent down the opening of the 20 others were above. With one blow of the axe, the Captain Nemo cut this formidable tentacle that slid wriggling down the ladder. Just as we were passing one on the other to reach the platform, 2 other arms, slashing the air, came down on the seaman placed before Captain Nemo and lifted him up with irresistible power. Captain Nemo uttered a cry and rushed out. We hurried after him. What a scene! The unhappy man, seized by the tentacle and fixed to the suckers, was balanced in the air at caprice of his enormous trunk. He rattled in his throat. He was stifled. He cried, "Help, help!" These words, spoken in French, startled me. I had a fellow countryman on board, perhaps several. The heart-rending cry, I shall hear it all my life. The unfortunate man was lost. Who could rescue him from that powerful pressure? However, Captain Nemo had rushed to the polyp, and with one blow of the axe had cut through the arm. His lieutenant struggled furiously against the monsters that crept on the flanks of the Nautilus. The crew fought with their axes. The Canadian, Conseil, and I buried our weapons in the fleshy masses. A strong smell of musk penetrated the atmosphere. It was horrible. For one instant, I thought the unhappy man, entangled with the polyp, would be torn from its powerful suction. 7 of the 8 arms had been cut off. Only one wriggled in the air, brandishing the victim like a feather. But just as Captain Nemo and his lieutenant threw themselves on it, the animal ejected a stream of black liquid. We were blinded with it. When the cloud disappeared, the cuttlefish had disappeared, and my unfortunate countryman with it. 10 or 12 polyps now invaded the platform and the sides of the Nautilus. We rolled pell-mell into the midst of the nest of serpents that wriggled on the platform in the waves of blood and ink. It seemed as though these slimy tentacles sprang up like the Hydra's heads. Ned Land's harpoon at each stroke was plunged into the staring eyes of the cuttlefish, but my bold companion was suddenly overturned by the tentacles of a monster he had not been able to avoid. Ah, how my heart beat with emotion and horror! The formidable beak of the cuttlefish was open over Ned Land. The unhappy man would be cut in two. I rushed to his succor. But Captain Nemo was there before me with his axe, disappeared between the two enormous jaws, and miraculously saved the Canadian, rising, plunged with his harpoon deep into the triple heart of the polyp. I owed myself this revenge, said the captain to the Canadian. Ned bowed without replying. The combat had lasted a quarter of an hour. The monsters, vanquished and mutilated, left us at last and disappeared under the waves. Captain Nemo, covered with blood, nearly exhausted, gazed upon the sea that had swallowed up one of his companions, and great tears gathered in his eyes. Chapter 19, The Gulf Stream. This terrible scene on the 20th of April none of us can ever forget. I have written it under the influence of violent emotion. Since then, I have revised the recital. I have read it to Conseil and to the Canadian. They found it exact as to facts, but insufficient as to effect. To paint such pictures, one must have a pen of the most illustrious of our poets, the author of The Toilers of the Deep. I have said that Captain Nemo wept while watching the waves. His grief was great. It was the second companion he had lost since our arrival on board. And what a death! That friend, crushed, stifled, bruised by the dreadful arms of the polyp, pounded by his iron jaws, would not rest with his comrades in the peaceful coral cemetery. In the midst of the struggle, it was the despairing cry uttered by the unfortunate man that had torn my heart. The poor Frenchman, forgetting his conventional language, had taken to his own mother tongue to utter a last appeal. Amongst the crew of the Nautilus, associated with the body and soul of the captain, recoiling like him from all contact with men, I had a fellow countryman. Did he alone represent France in this mysterious association? Evidently composed of individuals of various nationalities? It was one of these insoluble problems that rose up unceasingly before my mind. Captain Nemo entered the room. When I saw him, no more for some time, but that he was sad and irresolute, I could see by the vessel, of which he was the soul, and which received all his impressions. The Nautilus did not keep on its settled course. It floated about like a corpse at the will of the waves. It went at random. He could not tear himself away from the scene of the last struggle, from the sea that had devoured one of his men. 10 days passed thus. It was not till the 1st of May that the Nautilus resumed its northerly course. After having sighted the Bahamas at the mouth of the Bahama Canal, we were then following the current from the largest river to the sea that has its banks, its fish, its proper temperatures. I mean the Gulf Stream. It is really a river that flows freely in the middle of the Atlantic and whose waters do not mix with the ocean waters. It is a salt river, saltier than the surrounding sea. Its mean depth is 1,500 fathoms. Its mean breadth, 10 miles. In certain places, the current flows with the speed of 2 miles and a half an hour. The body of its waters is more considerable than that of all the rivers of the globe. It was on this ocean river that the Nautilus then sailed. I must add that, during the night, the phosphorescent waters of the Gulf Stream rivaled the electric power of our watchlight, especially in the stormy weather that threatened us so frequently. May 8th, we were still crossing Cape Hatteras, at the height of North Carolina. The width of the Gulf Stream there is 75 miles, and its depth 210 yards. The Nautilus still went at random. All supervision seemed abandoned. I thought that under these circumstances, escape would be possible. Indeed, the inhabited shores offered anywhere an easy refuge. The sea was incessantly plowed by the steamers that ply between New York or Boston and the Gulf of Mexico. The overrun day and night by the little schooners coasting about the several ports of the American coast. We could only hope to be picked up. It was a favorable opportunity, notwithstanding the 30 miles that separated the Nautilus from the coasts of the Union. One unfortunate circumstance thwarted the Canadians' plans. The weather was very bad. We were nearing the shores where tempests are so frequent. That country of waterspouts and cyclones actually engendered by the current of the Gulf Stream. To tempt the sea in a frail boat was certain destruction. Ned Land owned this himself. He fretted, seized with nostalgia, that flight only could cure. Master, he said that day to me, this must come to an end. I must make a clean breast of it. This Nemo is leaving land and going up to the north, but I declare to you that I have not enough of the South Pole. I have had enough of the South Pole, and I will not follow him north. What is to be done, Ned, since flight is impracticable just now? We must speak to the captain, said he. You said nothing when we were in your native seas. I will speak now we are in mine. When I think that before long the Nautilus will be by Nova Scotia, and that there near Newfoundland is a large bay, and into that bay the St. Lawrence empties itself, and that the St. Lawrence is my river, the river by Quebec, my native town. When I think of this, I feel furious. It makes my hair stand at end. Sir, I would rather throw myself into the sea. I will not stay here. I am stifled. The Canadian was evidently losing all patience. His vigorous nature could not stand this prolonged imprisonment. His face altered daily. His temper became more surly. I knew what he must suffer, for I was seized with homesickness myself. Nearly 7 months had passed without our having had any news from land. Captain Nemo's isolation, his altered spirits, especially since the fight with the polyps, his taciturnity, all made me view things in a different light. Well, sir, said Ned, seeing I did not reply. Well, Ned, do you wish me to ask the Captain Nemo his intentions concerning us? Yes, sir, although he has already made them known. Yes, I wish it settled finally. Speak for me in my name only if you like. But I so seldom meet him. He avoids me. That is all the more reason for you to go see him. I went to my room. From thence I meant to go to the Captain Nemo. It would not do to let this opportunity of meeting him slip. I knocked at the door. No answer. I knocked again, then turned the handle. The door opened. I went in. The captain was there, bending over his work table. He had not heard me. Resolved not to go without having spoken, I approached him. He raised his head quickly, frowned, and said roughly, You here? What do you want? To speak to you, Captain. But I am busy, sir. I am working. I leave you at liberty to shut yourself up. Cannot I be allowed the same? This reception was not encouraging, but I was determined to hear the answer and everything that went with it. Sir, I said coldly, I have to speak to you on a matter that admits of no delay. What is it, sir? He replied ironically. Have you discovered something that has escaped me, or has the sea delivered up any new secrets? We were at cross purposes, but before I could reply, he showed me an open manuscript on his table and said in a more serious tone, Here, Monsieur Arnaud, is a manuscript written in several languages. It contains the sum of my studies of the sea, and, if it pleases God, it shall not perish with me. This manuscript, signed with my name, complete with the history of my life, will be shut up in a single floating case. The last survivor of all of us on board the Nautilus will throw this case into the sea, and it will go whither it is borne by the waves. This man's name, his history, written by himself, his mystery, when then be revealed some day? Captain, I said, I can but approve of the idea that makes you act thus. The result of your studies must not be lost, but the means you employ seem to me to be primitive. Who knows where the winds will carry this case, and in whose hands it will fall? Could you not use some other means? Could you not, or one of yours? Never, sir, he said, hastily interrupting me. But I and my companions are ready to keep this manuscript in store, and, if you will, put us at liberty. At liberty, said the captain, rising. Yes, sir, that is the subject on which I wish to question you. For 7 months we have been here on board, and I ask you today, in the name of my companions and in my own, if your intention is to keep us here always. Monsieur Arnaud, I will answer you today as I did 7 months ago. Whoever enters the Nautilus must never quit it. You impose actual slavery upon us. Give it what name you please. But everywhere the slave has the right to regain his liberty. Who denies you this right? Have I ever tried to chain you with an oath? He looked at me with his arms crossed. Sir, I said, to return a second time to the subject will be neither to your nor my taste, but as we have entered upon it, let us go through with it. I repeat, it is not only myself whom it concerns. Study is to me a relief, a diversion, a passion that could make me forget everything. Like you, I am willing to live obscure, in the frail hope of bequeathing one day to future time the result of my labors. But it is otherwise with Ned Land. Every man worthy of the name deserves some consideration. Have you thought that love of liberty, hatred of slavery, can rise to schemes of revenge in a nature like the Canadian's, that he could think, attempt, and try? I was silenced. Captain Nemo rose. Whatever Ned Land thinks of, attempts, or tries, what does it matter to me? I did not seek him. It is not for my pleasure that I keep him on board. As for you, Monsieur Arnaud, you are one of those who can understand everything, even silence. I have nothing more to say to you. Let this first time you have come to treat of this subject be the last. For a second time I will not listen to you. I retired. Our situation was critical. I related my conversation to my 2 companions. We know now, said Ned, that we can accept nothing from this man. The Nautilus is nearing Long Island. We will escape whatever the weather may be. But the sky became more and more threatening. Symptoms of a hurricane became manifest. The atmosphere was becoming white and misty. On the horizon, fine streaks of cirrus clouds were succeeded by masses of cumuli. Other low clouds passed swiftly by. The swollen sea rose in huge billows. The birds disappeared with an exception of the petrels, those friends of the storm. The barometer fell sensibly and indicated an extreme tension of the vapors. The mixture of the storm glass was decomposed under the influence of the electricity that pervaded the atmosphere. The tempest burst on the 18th of May, just as the Nautilus was floating off Long Island, some miles from the port of New York. I can describe the strife of the elements, for instead of fleeing to the depths of the sea, Captain Nemo, by an unaccountable caprice, would brave it on the surface. The wind blew from the southwest at first. Captain Nemo, during the squalls, had taken his place on the platform. He had made himself fast to prevent from being washed overboard by the monstrous waves. I had hoisted myself up and made myself fast too, dividing my admiration between the tempest and the extraordinary man who was coping with it. The raging sea was swept by huge clouds and drifts of clouds, which were actually saturated with waves. The Nautilus, sometimes lying on its side, sometimes standing up like a mast, rolled and pitched terribly. About 5 o'clock, a torrent of rain fell that lulled neither sea nor wind. The hurricane blew nearly 40 leagues an hour. It is under these conditions that it overturns houses, breaks iron gates, displaces 24-pounders. However, the Nautilus, in the midst of the tempest, confirmed the words of a clever engineer. There is no well-constructed hull that cannot defy the sea. This was not a resisting rock. It was a steel spindle, obedient and movable, without rigging or masts, that braved its fury with impunity. However, I watched these raging waves attentively. They measured 15 feet in height and 150 to 175 yards long, and their speed of propagation was 30 feet per second. Their bulk and power increased with depth of water. Such waves as these at the Hebrides have displaced a mass of 8,400 pounds. They are which, in tempest of December 23, 1864, after destroying the town of Yedo in Japan, broke the same day on the shores of the Americas. The intensity of the tempest increased with the night. The barometer, as in 1860 at Reunion during a cyclone, fell 7/10 at close of day. I saw a large vessel pass on the horizon, struggling painfully. She was trying to lie to under half steam to keep up with the waves. It was probably one of those steamers of the line from New York to Liverpool or the Havre. It soon disappeared in the gloom. At 10 o'clock in the evening, the sky was fire. The atmosphere was streaked with vivid lightning. I could not bear the brightness of it, while the captain, looking at it, seemed to envy the spirit of the tempest. A terrible noise filled the air, a complex noise, made up of the howls of crushed waves, the roaring of the wind, and the claps of thunder. The wind veered suddenly in all points of the horizon, and the cyclone, rising in the east, returned after passing the north, west, and south, in inverse course pursued by the circular storm and the southern hemisphere. Ah, that Gulf Stream! It deserves its name, the name of the King of Tempests. It is that which causes those terrible and formidable cyclones. By the difference of temperature between its air and its currents, a shower of fire had succeeded the rain. The drops of water were changed to sharp spikes. One would have thought that Captain Nemo was courting a death worthy of himself, a death of lightning, as the Nautilus, pitching dreadfully, raised its steel spur in the air. It seemed to act as a conductor, and I saw long sparks burst from it. Crushed without strength, I crawled to the panel, opened it, and descended to the saloon. The storm was then at its height. It was impossible to stand upright in the interior of the Nautilus. Captain Nemo came down about 12. I heard the reservoirs filling by degrees, and the Nautilus sank slowly beneath the waves. Through the open windows in the saloon, I saw large fish, terrified, passing like phantoms in the water. Some were struck before my eyes. The Nautilus was still descending. I thought that at about 8 fathoms deep we should find calm. But no, the upper beds were too violently agitated for that. We had to seek repose at a more than 25 fathoms in the bowels of the deep. But there, what quiet, what silence, what peace! Who could have told that such a hurricane had been let loose on the surface of the ocean? Chapter 20. From latitude 47 degrees 24 longitude to 17 degrees 28 longitude. latitude. In consequence of the storm, we had been thrown eastward once more. All hope of escape on the shores of New York or St. Lawrence had faded, and poor Ned, in despair, had isolated himself like Captain Nemo. Conseil and I, however, never left each other. I said that the Nautilus had gone aside to the east. I should have said, to be more exact, the northeast. For some days it wandered first on the surface and then beneath it, amid those fogs so dreaded by sailors. What accidents are due to these thick fogs? What shocks upon the reefs when the wind drowns the breaking of the waves? What collisions between vessels in spite of their warning lights, whistles, and alarm bells? And the bottoms of these seas look like a field of battle, where still lie all the conquered of the ocean, some old and already encrusted, others fresh and reflecting from their iron bands and copper plates the brilliancy of our lantern. On the 15th of May, we were at the extreme south of the bank of Newfoundland. This bank consists of alluvia, or large heaps of organic matter, brought either from the equator of the Gulf Stream, or from the North Pole by the countercurrent of cold water which skirts the American coast. There also heaped up those erratic blocks which are carried along by broken ice, and close by a vast channel house of mollusks, which perish here by millions. The depth of the sea is not great at Newfoundland, not more than some hundreds of fathoms, but towards the south is a depression of 1,500 fathoms. There the Gulf Stream widens. It loses some of its speed and some of its temperature and becomes a sea. It was on the 17th of May, about 500 miles from Heart's Content, at a depth of more than 1,400 fathoms, that I saw the electric cable lying on the bottom. Conseil, to whom I had not mentioned it, thought at first it was a gigantic sea serpent, but, undeceived by the worthy fellow, and, by the way of consolation, related several particulars in the laying of this cable. The first one was laid in the year 1857 and 1858, but after transmitting about 400 telegrams, would not act any longer. In 1863, engineers constructed another one, measuring 2,000 miles in length and weighing 4,500 pounds, which was embarked on the Great Eastern. This attempt also failed. On the 25th of May, the Nautilus, being at a depth of more than 1,918 fathoms, was on the precise spot where the rupture occurred, which ruined the Enterprise. It was within 638 miles of the coast of Ireland, and at 2:30 in the afternoon, they discovered that communication with Europe had ceased. The electricians on board resolved to cut the cable before finishing it up. At 11 o'clock at night, they had recovered the damaged part. They had made another point and spliced it, and it was once more submerged. But some days after, it broke again, and in the depths of the ocean could not be recaptured. The Americans, however, were not discouraged. Cyrus Field, the bold promoter of the enterprise, as he had sunk all his own fortune, set a new subscription on foot, which was at once answered, and another cable was constructed on better principles. The bundles of conducting wires, which were each enveloped in a gutta percha and protected by a wadding of hemp, contained in a metallic covering. The Great Eastern sailed on the 13th of July, 1866. The operation worked well, but one incident occurred. Several times in unrolling the cable, they observed that nails had recently been forced into it, evidently with the motive of destroying it. Captain Anderson, the officers, and engineers consulted together and had it posted up that, if the offender was surprised on board, he would be thrown without further trial into the sea, From that time, the criminal attempt was never repeated. On the 23rd of July, the Great Eastern was not more than 500 miles from Newfoundland when they telegraphed from Ireland the news of the armistice concluded between Prussia and Austria after Sadowa. On the 27th, in the midst of heavy fogs, they reached the port of Heart's Content. The enterprise was successfully terminated, and for its first dispatch, the young America addressed old Europe in these words of wisdom so rarely understood: "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace and goodwill towards men." I did not expect to find the electric cable with its primitive state, such as it was on leaving the malfactory. It was actually called the manufactory. The long serpent, covered with remains of shells, bristling with foraminiferae, was encrusted with a strong coating which served as a protection against all boring mollusks. It lay quietly sheltered from the motions of the sea, and under a favorable pressure for the transmission of the electric spark, which passed from Europe to America in 0.32 of a second. Doubtless this cable will last for a great length of time, for they find the gutta percha covering is improved by the seawater. Besides, on this level, so well chosen, the cable is never so deeply submerged as to cause it to break. The Nautilus followed it to the lowest depth, which was more than 2,112 fathoms, and there it lay without any anchorage. And then we reached the spot where the accident had taken place in 1863. The bottom of the ocean then formed a valley of about 100 miles, and it was 100 miles broad, in which Mont Blanc might have been placed without its summit. Appearing above the waves, this valley is closed at the east by a perpendicular wall of more than 2,000 yards. We arrived there on the 28th of May, and the Nautilus was taken not more than 120 miles from Ireland. Was Captain Nemo going to land on the British Isles? No. To my great surprise, he made for the south, once more, coming back towards European seas. In rounding the Emerald Isle, for one instant, I caught sight of Cape Clear and the light which guides the thousands of vessels leaving Glasgow and Liverpool. An important question then arose in my mind. Did the Nautilus dare entangle itself in the Manche? Ned Land, who had then reappeared since we had been nearing land, did not cease to question me. How could I answer? Captain Nemo remained invisible. After having shown the Canadian a glimpse of American shores, was he going to show me the coast of France? But the Nautilus was still going southward. On the 30th of May, it passed in sight of Land's End, between the extreme point of England and the Scilly Isles, which were left to starboard. If we wish to enter the Manche, we must go straight to the east. He did not do so. During the whole of May 31st, the Nautilus described a series of circles on the water, which greatly interested me. It seemed to be seeking a spot it had some trouble finding. At noon, Captain Nemo himself came to work the ship's log. He spoke no word to me, but seemed gloomier than ever. What could sadden him thus? Was it his proximity to European shores? Had he some recollections of his abandoned country? If not, what did he feel? Remorse or regret? For a long while, this thought haunted my mind, and I had a kind of presentiment that before long chance would betray the captain's success. The next day, the 1st of June, the Nautilus continued the same process. It was evidently seeking some particular spot in the ocean. Captain Nemo took the sun's attitude, as had done all day before. The sea was beautiful, the sky clear. About 8 miles to the east, a large steam vessel could be discerned on the horizon. No flag uttered from its mast, and I could not discover its nationality. Some minutes before the sun passed the meridian, Captain Nemo took his sextant and watched with great attention. The Nautilus was motionless. It neither rolled nor pitched. I was on the platform when the attitude was taken, and Captain Nemo pronounced these words, "It is here." He turned and went below. Had he seen the vessel, which was changing its course and seemed to be nearing us? I could not tell. I returned to the saloon. The panels closed. I heard the hissing of the water in the reservoirs. The Nautilus began to sink, following a wonderful vertical line for its shores. Vertical line. For its screw communicated no motion to it. Some minutes later, it stopped at a depth of more than 420 fathoms. Resting on the ground, the luminous ceiling was getting darkened. Then the panels were opened, and through the glass I saw that brilliantly illuminated by the rays of our lantern for at least half a mile around us. I looked to the port side. I saw nothing but the immensity of quiet waters. But to starboard, on the bottom, appeared a large protuberance, which at once attracted my attention. One would have thought it a ruin buried under the coating of white shells, which resembling a covering of snow. Upon examining the mass attentively, I could recognize the ever-thickening form of the vessel bare of its masts, which must have sunk, certainly belonged to the past. This wreck, to be thus encrusted with the lime of whatever, must already be able to count as many years past at the bottom of the ocean. What was this vessel? Why did the Nautilus visit its tomb? Could it have been aught but a shipwreck which had drawn it under the water? I knew not what to think. When near me, in a slow voice, I heard Captain Nemo say, "At one time this ship was called the Marcellus. It carried 74 guns and was launched in 1762. In 1778, the 13th of August, commanded by La Poyet Vertreux, it fought boldly against the Preston. In 1779, on the 4th of July, it was the taking of Grenada with its squadron of Admiral Estaing. In 1781, the 5th of September, it took part in the Battle of the Comte de Grasse, in Chesapeake Bay. In 1794, the French Republic changed its name. On the 16th of April in the same year, it joined the squadron of Villaret-Joyeuse at Brest, being entrusted with the escort of a cargo of corn coming from America, under the command of Admiral Van Steebel. On the 11th and 12th Perial of the second year, this squadron fell, and it fell in with an English vessel. Sir, today is the 13th Perial, the 1st of June, 1868. It is now 74 years ago, day for day, on this very spot, in latitude of 47 degrees 24 longitude, 17 degrees 28 latitude, that this vessel, after fighting heroically, losing its 3 masts, with water in its hold, and a third of its crew disabled, preferred sinking with its 356 sailors to surrendering, and nailing its colors to the poop, that is the poop deck, disappeared under the waves to the cry of, "Long live the Republic!" "The Avenger!" I exclaimed. "Yes, sir, the Avenger. A good name," muttered Captain Nemo, crossing his arms. All right, my friends, I think that is all for this afternoon. I hope you're enjoying this. We are slowly working our way through this book. I think we have maybe 60 pages left to go. So we should be wrapping up this book sometime soon and beginning our next story. All right, my friends, this has been Indiana Homes for Storytime. Love to you all, and goodbye.
Please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notifications button. Thank you very much.